the Council Bluffs Community Schools for allowing us to use this facility, and to the Council Bluffs Area Chamber of Commerce, and to our many sponsors who make this event possible. Today we have our series sponsor, Hy-Vee. We have our gold sponsors, Advanced Southwest Iowa Corporation, Black Hills Energy, Southwest Iowa Association of Realtors, and U.S. Bank. And today's session sponsors are J. Joseph Narmy, Attorney at Law, and Teltner Peterson Law Firm, LLP. Would also like to thank John and Carolyn Kuhl for being here today. They're with Iowa School for the Deaf, and they're here signing for us today. So thank you guys very much. Just a quick reminder on the format at the back of the room, and I know many of you have found them because I've got a lot of questions that have come in so far, but there's cards back there where you can fill out and submit a question, and I would encourage you to do so. We are going to, if you guys that were here last week, we changed the format just a little bit on a couple of things, and we eliminated opening remarks and kind of extended closing remarks a little bit. And then we did away with the follow-up question in an effort to make sure that we could get 2 more questions, and I felt like that went well last week. One change we are going to make back, we're going to flip the opening and closing remarks. So we're going to let everybody do opening remarks so they can cover kind of what's going on, what's timely, hopefully prompt some more good current questions, and then we won't have closing comments at the end. So with that, let's go ahead and no particular order, we can begin with the opening remarks.
Well, I'll kick it off. I want to thank everybody for coming, braving the weather. I'm really impressed to see this many people at these coffees. So, again, I appreciate the sponsors. Well, you know, the session's starting out just as hectic as it always does. Our job right now is with committee meetings, bill assignments. We got the first column coming up. Friday the 15th was the last day to file any bills that the legislators want to bring forth. And now we have to get the House bills through committee and get ready for the floor. So we're really hectic right now with it's kind of a mad rush. There's going to be so many subcommittee meetings. Every closet, every room's going to be pretty well busy all the time, along with debate. As far as this session goes, there's been several bills I would like to see come out. I proposed a consent bill. What that is teaching the children in the human behavior classes, teaching them consent for the gentlemen and the women to understand consent, how to respect each other, where the boundaries are. I mean, I believe that needs to be done. Several other states have done it. I'm hoping that will come out and have the Board of Education set the criteria. And along with that, there's a $200,000 federal grant to help install that. I proposed another bill I mentioned before for a 1% tax on fireworks. And it'll go to a fund by the fire marshal, and what it does is gives the volunteer fire departments and the emergency rescue services to write a grant for equipment and supplies and training, and that's much needed, especially in the rural areas. So I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Charlie. Good morning. I'm John Jacobson, your representative for District 22. Thank you all for being here. I would echo what Representative McConkey said. This is a tremendous turnout in tough weather conditions. I just got a quick top 10 list essentially for you all. Number 1, I want to thank all of the great people from the Council Bluffs Chamber of Commerce who made such a tremendous impression when they came out this week, hosted their meet and greet, and really showed the presence of Southwest Iowa in front of not just the Southwest Iowa delegation, but all of our legislators. It was very impressive. We had a tremendous turnout, and my thanks to you folks. And the corollary to that is I want to thank John Kuhl, who is right in front of me here. John came out recently and testified in front of my good colleague Gary Moore's subcommittee on the absolute importance of the infrastructure funding out at Iowa School for the Deaf. And John was just a tremendous advocate for you. So he really made an impression that I think was uniformly received very well, and I think there's uniform consensus right now to support that project. Number two, we passed a lot of ethics code legislation right out of the bat. The first one applied to we legislators, the other one applied to the lobbyists. What's great about the ethics code that we passed is it now formally ensconces the federal requirements, particularly regarding sexual harassment. We have had issues in the legislature in the past, and Chairman McKean and I are trying to be more, proactive on that. Number three, we passed an outstanding insurance division bill, which helps to keep Iowa at the forefront of our insurance industry nationwide, and also puts in consumer protections for when the opposite of mergers happens, when you see different lines splitting off, dividing out, and this covers both stock and mutual insurance companies there. Third of all, gubernatorial succession. We're still working on what happens. We already have recently lieutenant governor assume the governorship, then the lieutenant governor is picked anew, and that person, of course, never having been elected by anybody in theory, could become governor for 4 years. We're addressing that to make sure that there is some ratification by representatives of elected members. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, Alfie's Law. We passed a bill that they told me for the first time in history, we had the American Civil Liberties Union and the Family Leader both advocating verbally for the bill at the subcommittee. But basically what the bill does, it simply says that you cannot aggressively engage in withdrawal of life support over parental objection, that there has to be recourse and not just a unilateral decision. If you're familiar with the Alfie Evans case in England from last summer, this could happen in Iowa. We're getting ahead of that. Also, Representative McConkey and I have co-sponsored an anti-female genital mutilation bill. A variation of that bill passed unanimously out of the Judiciary Committee the other night. It has huge bipartisan support, especially from our colleagues that would be more liberal than me in the Iowa City area, but it's really a unified bill, and I'm very pleased about it. I've introduced a bill to cut some antiquated, outdated regulations in the code. I'm working very hard on continuing the program known as the Early Farmer Tax Credit. Right now in my business career, I've seen still, with the federal rate reduced, still many family farms literally having to sell thousands of acres just to pay federal and state estate tax, to where it's harder for them to continue farming. National Guard salaries. Right now, they are not taken care of if they are assigned and commissioned to be deployed. And we've got to fix that, because we have a lot of National Guardsmen and National Guard auxiliary that are called into flood and search and rescue and other actions, and right now their employers can discriminate against them, so we're trying to tighten that up. And finally, I'd be remiss if I did not say that we passed some tremendous rural education, transportation equity. I wish Senator Shipley were here, because he's been a true champion of that. But the good thing is, with respect to that bill, last year it was kind of a one-time shot. Now it's, to use an analogy in foundation work, it's endowed. It's going to be ongoing. And just in my 5 districts of Lewis Central, AHSTW, Riverside, Tri-Center, and Trainer, hundreds of thousands of dollars of your tax dollars being retained here locally. So it's always an honor to be with you. It's always an honor to walk into our beautiful Capitol building, especially this last week when we had full silver moons popping up against the golden landscape of the Capitol. Thank you.
Good morning, Dan Dawson, Senate District 8, which is all Carr Lake and most of Council Bluffs. Welcome everyone here this morning. John hit in his top 10 quite a few of the highlights there. The only thing additional I would add to that, for me personally, this last week, we've been working quite a bit over in the Senate on sports betting. As many of you know, this last year, the Supreme Court legalized sports betting nationwide. So we're trying to figure out the pathway forward and how that works here in Iowa. We heard from a lot of groups in the last 3-4 weeks, whether it be the Iowa Lottery, whether it be the leagues, fantasy sports, the casinos, everyone kind of bringing their own piece to the table there a little bit as to how they think sports betting might work here in Iowa. We listened to all those groups. We produced a bill here this last week that's kind of the initial skeleton that we're going to try to carry forward. We ran that out of subcommittee here on Tuesday and out of state government on Thursday. The bill has some variations, I believe, from the House bill right now, so it'll be interesting to see how this all comes together before all is said and done. One thing about anything gaming related, it's not a partisan issue. There's people on both sides, Republicans and Democrats, who like it and don't like it. It'll be interesting to see how the deal comes together in the end, but that's been probably the biggest thing taking place in the Senate this week, so look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Well, good morning. Excuse me. Good morning. I'm State Representative Mary Ann Lanusa. I represent House District 16, which is the southern and eastern portions of Council Bluffs inside the city limits. And I apologize for being late. We live at the top of a very steep hill and watched our neighbor back out of his driveway and do a tailspin and go into some snow. So we helped there a little bit and made us a little bit late here. But thank you all for coming under these kind of icy conditions, and I hope everybody's prepared for what's supposed to come this afternoon anyway. As far as, pretty much a lot has been said here. I will just tell you that in my role as Chair of Government Oversight this Wednesday, when we have our meeting, I have invited Director Jerry Foxhoven, who is the Director of Iowa Department of Human Services, as well as the CEOs of the 2 managed care organizations in Iowa who are working with our Medicaid patients across the state. Because if you recall, last year the legislature unanimously, I believe, passed, in both houses unanimously, passed a government oversight, or excuse me, a managed care oversight bill because we had concerns, especially in the House, had concerns about some of our providers who were not being paid in a timely manner, patients who weren't necessarily receiving care that they had been receiving or needed to be receiving. And so we were very concerned about the rollout of the managed care to Medicaid to managed care. So we passed an oversight bill last year, and in my role as Chair of Oversight, it's very appropriate for me, I have that right and that responsibility to draw those principals back in, the CEOs, if you will, of all 3 entities, to ask them, it's not good enough to just say, well, we passed a bill, now we're done with that. I want to follow up and make sure that what we asked for in that piece of legislation is actually occurring. And so we're going to be focusing on 3 areas: credentialing and prior authorization, which I've heard from providers across the state is very time consuming. It's caused them to hire extra staff and consultants and have to borrow money to be able to keep afloat because there's so much time devoted to that, and then also payment accuracy. So that'll be a big meeting. I'm very excited. I'm not looking for it to be a political meeting at all. I'm actually looking for answers, and I want to make sure that that our Medicaid providers are being paid in a timely manner for services that they're providing in good faith, and also that our Medicaid clients, patients are receiving the care that they need to receive. And then not to go on, since we've already covered a lot of it, I will just also note that this week I was named as a legislative member to the IPERS Investment Board and also to the 411 Board for Fire and Police Protection. And what is interesting is that the first meeting that I'll be attending of the IPERS board actually meets the day before our next legislative coffee. So I will give you an update at our next coffee about that meeting. Thank you all for being here. I look forward to your questions.
All right, thank you all for those introductory remarks. Our first question today comes from John Blue. John, right here. John's question is, what is being done to prevent the runoff of nitrates and waste from farms and large livestock operations?
Into our waterways.
Who sits on one
Yeah.
of those committees?
Yeah,
Of course, you got, yeah, I don't sit on natural resource or ag right now. I'm not sure what's going on at the subcommittee level. I mean, there's always bills out there, but, I don't have a whole lot of visibility right now at the committee work, which is happening in those two committees.
John, I can tell you at this juncture, we had Iowa Agriculture Secretary Mike Nag in this week, and again, I regret Senator Shipley isn't here to get some credit for this, but he, along with Representative Momsen, chair the joint House-Senate Appropriations Subcommittee for Agriculture and Natural Resources. And Secretary Nag actually presented a report that details with numbers, statistics, county analyses, just published. It's on their site, but there's also some paper printed versions of that out there, basically tracking and quantifying the results of those efforts that literally began prior to his term under Secretary Northey. There has been progress, some progress significantly in some areas, not so much so in other areas, because what was really impressed upon us is that this is a 20-year process, that there are going to be some ups and downs and some variations as we go, but the resources have been expended and continue to be expended. There are a tremendous amount of what I would call strategic and tactical mapping and planning sections, where literally they're isolating in on the different areas of the state geographically, the different consortiums of people that are working with it. What I was impressed about, Mr. Blue, was that there's a lot of public-private partnerships going on with respect to government working with the local people from the private sector to kind of help with this project. The other thing that we sometimes don't always keep in mind is that healthy tension between the feds and the state. As we've learned recently with some of the veterinary disease issues. We had the terrible situation with the aviary flu in 2015, and unfortunately there, some of the feds that really didn't know as much about Iowa as Iowans do kind of had their foot on the throat trying to micromanage our approach. And a concern has been, you know, there we were discarding remains of millions of birds. What would happen if that came into a worse situation with larger carcass animals? You know, what would we do? Would there be burial? Would there be incineration? Would there be composting? And so there's a lot going on right now, but what I would volunteer to do is try to get links to the chamber here, because it's really a quite good report. And this committee has had in several other groups that have done some tremendous white paper reports about some of the investments in cleaning up waterways and some of these other issues. And the Vets Disease Lab at ISU is an example of that. So there's literally a lot of quantification out there, and I'll try to direct you specifically, John, directly to those, and then maybe to the chamber folks for some nitty-gritty numbers on that.
I don't have much to add to that, John, but that's a good question. We are, I believe, the second #1 polluter, the second polluter in the nation. We're number one in hog production, poultry, and the CAFO is confined animal feeding operations. It's going slow. It's not going fast enough. We need to, and with the funding, you know, with last year we added the funding off excise tax off the water will go to fund that. And a lot of it's volunteer. I know there is some progress being made, and a lot of it has to do with cover crop. You know, I think soil conservation is one of the best ways to go. You know, you retain the soil, you know, then you retain the runoff, and it's an ongoing problem. It's going to take years to work out, because we've been, you know, we're number one producer of several hogs and eggs in the nation, so there's going to be a lot of problems. We need to look at it and stay constant on it, and the monitoring needs to be, I think we need to monitor it better than what we're doing. There's a lot of stuff in the works, so it's a good question. Keep asking that question.
It is going to be a long-term project. We just don't have the structures right now available to deal with this issue in a 1 or 2 year time frame. Some of the structures are federal funding. That's locked into certain areas, and it's extremely bureaucratic, and you have a hard time breaking into those issues. I mean, for instance, we'll talk about forward Pottawattamie, right? That starts clear up in Crawford, Carroll County. But the federal government, when they provide resources for water quality, that goes through, I believe, a HUD grant. And so I believe Fremont County did pretty well in deploying some of that money down there for some water quality issues. But the reality is the nitrates aren't starting down Fremont County. They're starting to clear up there. But where it does start, it's not an urban district by federal classification, so we can't move the money up there. State, we have different parameters as well too, and each county has their conservation district, and every November on the ballot, we end up voting for some persons elected to those districts there. So we have counties with their own piece of the pie, we have state issues, and we have federal, and the question is how do you break it out of a county by county issue and break it into a region or on the waterway? And that's a difficult issue. There's land rights and land issues there, and elected officials who have their own concerns about their own particular area, and that is takes a while to move that boat. Not to say that's right, but there's just it's a lot more than any one body to move this or to holistically deal with this issue. So, and that's not putting down any county conservation district whatsoever. It's just when they're locked in that particular area, that's just how we've broken this thing down, and really just start at the point source, clear upstream, to start taking care of this issue here, to really deploy resources actively.
All right, next question comes from Steve Harmon. I think Steve is right up front here. Steve's question is, Bruce Hunter has introduced a red flag gun seizure bill, and the Iowa House, HF 123, would allow anyone to anonymously and in secret go out before a judge and accuse someone of being an unfit or unsafe gun owner. The judge would then order the guns to be confiscated with no trial or hearing. Will you vote for this unconstitutional law?
I would not vote for that law because it's blatantly unconstitutional under the First Amendment, but also under the 14th Amendment, Equal Protection Due Process Clause as applied to the states. Without due diligence, that would violate both equal protection and due process. The 14th Amendment says a state actor cannot do that with respect to any federal Bill of Rights right without procedural and substantive due process. The fatal flaw in that bill is that it's on its face prima facie unconstitutional because it does not provide for due diligence. And amending gun laws is one thing, but doing it properly is another, and you cannot start out with blatantly unconstitutional language on its face. That's not the way this republic was established to make change.
I won't vote for that, but it's not gonna go anywhere, so.
I haven't seen Bruce Hunter's bill, but the confiscation law, I think you're talking, I don't know if it's similar to the one that was passed in Florida after the shooting. Is it similar to that one? And I do believe that the purpose of that is have an Uncle Billy that's having a meltdown and everything's going wrong. And, you know, and you're worried about him committing suicide or hurting somebody else, and you don't think he's stable enough, you know, then you can go for his benefit in front of the judge, and the police can be there too, if they have a huge concern of this person is temporarily confiscating their guns until they get help. I think we need to look at something like that. I haven't seen that bill, but that's the protection for himself, you know, and people around him. I mean, we've all seen people have serious problems, and it seems unsurmountable that they wind up taking their lives. And it's more protection of that person than anybody else. Florida put that law in after the last school shooting, because that individual had complaints. Several, the police have been to his door, FBI's been to his door, and his family was supposed to keep his guns away from him, and they didn't do it. So that was the purpose of that bill. But, you know, if anything is unconstitutional, I think we need to be looking at people that are having mental health issues. You know, should they have access to guns? I mean, it comes down to simple common sense. You know, protect themselves and protect others. I mean, we have shootings every day, and the bodies are just piling up. And there's no good solution to that. But I'd be willing to take, I haven't seen Bruce Hunter's bill, but if it's similar to the Florida bill, I think we need to have some common sense gun laws. So that's my opinion of it. And that bill won't see the light of day. That's what you're worried about. So thank you for your question.
I haven't seen that House bill either, or at least there hasn't been anything filed on the Senate side I'm aware of like that. Because John explains it's unconstitutional, that will not see the light of day in our Judiciary Committee or in the Senate.
All right, thank you. Next question is from Dr. Brian Jack Holder. Here. Regarding House File 335, why should non-parties be forced to file nomination papers in March with Democrats and Republicans when they are not allowed to participate in the primary elections?
Well, I will take that because I filed that bill. It is a bill about equity, and it's about consistency, and I've had a number of constituents come to me and ask why it is that Democrats and Republicans file for state office in March, which we do roughly the middle of March. And if someone wants to file as an independent or libertarian or Green Party or any other party, they are allowed to file until the end of August. That seemed unfair to a lot of people. And so it was a bill not targeted at any one party or any one individual. It was a matter that I brought forward on behalf of my constituents for consistency and equity.
On my opinion,
Where's the democracy?
No, there will be no shouting.
My opinion, you know, we leave the process open. I mean, I'd like to see as many people, that are concerned citizen, be able to put themselves on the ballot. I don't think it's that big, you know, I don't think it's a problem. I really don't. But that's just my opinion.
I guess in a way, I never had so much fun running against 3 other people in a 4-way race. It certainly was vigorous, and I always enjoy. I think, Brian, you were a competitor in that race with
Just a
me.
paper candidate.
Well, you still pulled in some votes. So I think what's important in this process is that we maintain an ability for candidates who wish to run, if they're ballot qualified, to be treated like other major party candidates for purposes of debate and for purposes of access to a lot of the candidate venues and forums. You know, on the national level, this is done with C-SPAN. For instance, you have your private networks such as CNN and Fox that sometimes have, because they're private entities, more restrictive candidate forums. Fox in the last GOP presidential election even did a two-tier system where they had the A team on during one debate and kind of the B team in terms of polling data on in a debate preliminary to that. You can make the argument that they have the right to do that if you believe that broadcast air is not public airways, but I think in situations where you have publicly funded media outlets, then I think they need to be open to all ballot qualified candidates. I will say this, my colleagues at KMA Radio in the 3rd District Congressional debate had all of the ballot qualified candidates on there, and the Libertarians at that juncture were ballot qualified. So you guys know me, I'm a free speech guy. I'm almost a First Amendment absolutist, and so that's what's great about these meetings on Saturdays. I did a head count. We've got 80 people here today in absolutely adverse weather conditions. So I always think that mixing up of ideas is always a good thing.
I didn't see the bill yet. I guess I didn't put much thought in this issue as it's more of the Senate side. I can see if you have a party status, like last election, Libertarians were having official party status. I can see the value in them being treated fairly as the Republican Democrat Party on the same process. I guess I don't know how that would play with an independent. Someone want to come on who wasn't a part of a major party, or the Green Party. Washington Party doesn't have party status here in the state this year. So I guess to put some more thought to that, how an independent would play into that process. But I think if you do have major party status where we have 2 parties, 4 parties, or 8 parties, that it should all be on the same playing field. And if that means March deadline, then that means a March deadline, or how the current law is right now.
All right. Next question comes from Alona Holland. Did I get the name right? Perfect. Thank you. Question is, would you know the reasoning behind the removal of massage licensing for Iowa?
Are you referring to a bill that Representative Jeff Shipley filed? I know that he filed a bill. I really don't know why he filed it. I don't believe it's going anywhere, because I think, we believe there's an importance to having that, but I don't actually, to answer your question, I don't know why he filed it. I am aware that there is a bill in the House to do that.
She's
What was the
exactly
bill?
right. Yeah, he's filed bills, and I don't,
And he's not related to Senator Shipley, just for
Sure.
the record.
Sure. I've been trying to get Senator Shipley to come over and do something about that. But,
he also filed a bill that would take hallucinogenic mushrooms, put it on a Schedule 2. So I don't think it's gonna see the light of day. At least that one.
I will just add that I wanted to follow up for the earlier question. Mr. Blue, the numbers, you might be able to access those on the water quality at www.iastate.edu, and then just type in water quality, and then also go to vetmed.iastate.edu, where they've got the great white paper there on that. Those will get you started, or anybody else that might be interested in those. I was just able to pull those up here real quickly.
Was the bill what about massage therapy?
we're not allowed to do it.
To get rid of licensing.
Oh, well, I think we did the exact opposite in the Senate this last week, where we actually applied some more restrictions to that profession, primarily because it is used as a conduit human trafficking, primarily along the I-35 corridor. There's a lot of issues in the Des Moines area as well as Omaha. That's not to say that all massage therapists are running human trafficking operations out of their establishments, but it is known that the illegal activities have shifted there. Persons who run those establishments a lot of times will hop from place to place. They typically don't buy a building. They'll rent things out for 2 or 3 months. Once they attract law enforcement attention, they'll typically close up shop and go somewhere else and get a license. Unfortunately, there's a lot of individuals who are underage that's utilized in those entities as well. We passed bills last year, the governor, I believe the governor signed as well this year, another one out of the Senate, to kind of try to put more focus on those licenses and maybe expand the communication between different municipalities. So that way they know when one of these roaming shops are going from place to place, gives the city a little more ability to get a heads up on that and deny those licenses from even taking place in the municipalities or counties.
Yeah, Senator Dawson is correct. The group of 12 that I work with on Wednesdays at noon, that's a very big concern. The human trafficking and underage aspects that are invading that industry, particularly in some of our urban areas. And we too agree that that needs to be all support given to law enforcement to protect these young women.
And that was, those were the concerns that I heard immediately after that bill was filed, that it would open the door to increased human trafficking. Again, not that that's what's going on in every massage entity, but those were the concerns I heard immediately once that bill was filed, so it will not advance.
All right, thank you. Next question comes from Ken Peterson. Where's Ken? Over here. A majority of Iowans support our current system for nominating judges. Why does it need to be changed?
I'll take that one first. The system absolutely needs to be changed because of the politics internally inside the system. One of the things that doesn't really get reported on enough out there when we talk about this topic is the actual attorneys and laypersons who complain to legislators that participate on these commissions. Some attorneys and laypersons would say the system's okay. Some say some minor changes need to be made, and actually I talked to a bar commission member here in the last 2 weeks that the whole system needs overhauled. I would take this back, well, I mean, that's the short answer to your question. The long answer is this, is that the way Iowa nominates their judges, it puts the citizen or the layperson at a disadvantage. What I mean by that is you can take a look at the 4th Judicial District right here. I use this as a prime example. The commission is made up of 5 bar persons, which is lawyers elected by lawyers, where if you're not a lawyer in this room, you have no say in that process. You have 5 governor-appointed persons, and you have a senior judge for the District Nominating Commission. Most of the bar individuals, they work in the same profession every day. They might not be colleagues, but they might go in and out of the courthouse multiple times, and they know each other. I would say, you know, just like my civilian profession, I know a lot of law enforcement. John knows a lot of attorneys and whatnot. So you meet once a year. We've had a little bit busier clip this we've had quite a few judge appointments, but when you meet once a year on average, or once every other couple of years, and your lay persons, one's from Fremont County, one's from Mills, one's from Montgomery, we got one from Shelby. They don't know each other. They're supposed to be the regular citizen or the common person bringing their perspective into these commissions. So you have 5 colleagues, 5 persons who don't reside next to each other, don't know each other, and then on top of that, you have a senior judge. There is a lot of internal politics. The displacement of geography by citizens does not make it 5 and 5. The lawyers on the commission bring a heavy depth of experience, but they also have the ability to sway a commission. There's a lot of concerning issues across the state about the application of individual commissions. There's not a whole lot of rules how these commissions are run. Some commissions, the senior judge votes. Some commissions, the senior judge doesn't vote. Some commissions, the senior judge says, commissioners, you can talk to applicants prior to us meeting on one day. Some senior judges say, no way, no one's talking to anyone unless on the day of the commission. So on the day of commission, you have, let's say, 10 applicants, 5, 15, depending on what jurisdiction you're in, will show up, and they will interview each applicant for 15 minutes. The citizen representing on that commission, if they do not practice in law, all they can do is look at a resume, look at maybe some reference letters, and make a determination within 15 minutes if that person would be a good judge or not. That puts them at a disadvantage. And then again, it's not 5 and 5 because you have a senior judge who's also a lawyer on there. I think the complaints or the goals that we're trying to achieve is to make sure that the citizen has as equal a voice in these commissions one way or the other. I think this is last week, the House passed an amendment, I think it was a smart amendment. Within that amendment, they recognize that there's a difference between the state nominating commission and the district nominating commissions. That amendment that they passed that I think, well, I self and personally, I really appreciate the amendment because they took a lot of public feedback, leaves pretty much our district commissions as is. So there will still be 5 lay persons, 5 bar elected persons, but the senior judge is now removed from that commission. The state Supreme Court will appoint a member in lieu of, but it won't be a judge practicing in that area to avoid any undue influence. And the best part about that amendment that I like is that no longer is the chair selected by, previously the senior judge is the automatic chair in all these commissions. What the House amendment does, they said that commissions, you pick your own chair. So it could be a citizen, could be a bar person, or it could even be the Supreme Court individual appointed. But at least it makes the commissions operate better together between the bar side and the commission side, and it gives them the ability to operate independently. The House amendment also had a lot of other good things as well. If you take a looking at the 4th here, most of the bar members are from Pottawattamie County, the major urban area, which makes sense because that's where a lot of legal work happens at. But if you are a bar member trying to get elected in the commission, whether it be the state or the district commission, and you live in a rural area, you're at a severe disadvantage because you have to take a petition around to fellow lawyers to get on that election ballot. And it's a lot easier to get 50 lawyers to sign on. I forget the exact number around, whether the district would be a state commission. If you live in Sioux City, Council Bluffs, particularly Polk County, or if you're a rural lawyer out in Red Oak, Iowa, it's a lot harder to find 50 lawyers out there. You've got to do a lot more driving. So I think it definitely took a lot of public input. I think it recognized the difference between the state commission, which that has its whole other set of issues right there. That has a similar, different numbers, but similar ratio, split half and half between bar and governor appointed individuals. But again, you have 3.1 million people statewide here in the state of Iowa. You have 10,000 lawyers, and they both have equal say. And on the statewide commission, you have some congressional districts where the last election, I believe, was under 20% of all lawyers even voted in that election to nominate their own fellow lawyers up there, which really skews things quite a bit. Particularly when we're talking about the 3rd branch of government. We're not really talking about another board or commission that talks about licensing or setting fees. This is our democracy, the 3rd branch of government. And we need to make sure that we give the citizen as equal much of a say as what the lawyers do have. So that, I applaud the House amendment there. We look forward to seeing it here, hopefully very soon. I'm not sure if they're making more tweaks or not, so.
Mr. Peterson, I ask you, I appreciate your question and your asking of it. The polling is actually a little bit nuanced on this. You're probably referring to the Iowa poll. The Iowa poll has made some pretty big misses of late in recent years. I'm not putting all of my stock in the Iowa poll there. If you look at the complaints that were issued to the Iowa Supreme Court and to the Iowa State Bar Association, there is some dissatisfaction with some of the particulars of how the judicial system is currently working. I have always talked about this issue in terms of competence, and right now, as my good liberal Democratic friend Dean Jennings says, I want someone who's paid the light bill. Unfortunately, we have a lot of folks going directly to the judgeships who've never really practiced law on their own. and they've never practiced an omnibus range of fields of law and industry. The area I work in, trust estates and probates, where we have fighting farm families and literally millions of dollars at stake economically. We have to look at complex formulas like alternate date valuation and special use going out 10 years. And frankly, if you are an attorney that is an English poli-sci major who has gone through law school and is a litigator, you are not prepared to hear those cases. I am an advocate of a more focused use of specialty courts. Talking with our good folks from Iowa Legal Aid today, we had the veterans in with Governor Reynolds this past week on looking at specialty veterans courts. Well, there needs to be a judicial or quasi-judicial process put into place to take care of that. Judge Craig Block is a dedicated probate specialty court judge, but he's assigned out of Polk County. We don't have any of those other judges in the state of Iowa, and that really puts us at a disadvantage here in western Iowa. We do need some changes, but we need to really look at the details. One of the proposals in the House bill was to allow applicants to come from other parts of the state to come over and apply for any judgeship. Well, I think we have enough problem here with people thinking the two-river approach in Iowa is Mississippi River, the Raccoon River. I really don't want someone from Burlington or Clinton or Dubuque coming over here and grabbing a judgeship. So we do need to make some changes, but it is complex, and my concern in this process has been that some of the experts have been totally excluded from the process. You can make a huge case that under the current system, the governor has way too much influence because the governor gets 8 picks toward the Supreme Court panel. You can also make the argument that the bar has way too much influence with 8 picks also, and you've got the Supreme Court judge in there. But clearly, the bar should not be totally excluded in this process. And that's where we are at this juncture. So we've got to get the experts. I mean, that would be like saying the President of the United States should be able to consult with the Joint Chiefs of Staff to, that they no longer have access to the door of the President. They're the military experts and they don't have access. The bar has got to be involved in this process. The way to do it, I believe, is to disperse this choice out among multiple different citizen partners, so to speak. That's what the House is approaching towards, and I think they've made some progress on that, but I don't think we're there just yet.
It is a complex issue we're talking about, and here's my biggest fear. I mean, our judicial branch is a checks and balance part, and what is going to, my fear what's going to happen is going to be political. We're going to have political appointments in it, and I want the experts, I'm like everybody else. I want my judge to know the law, understand the law, and know how to apply the law. I want experts in that field. And I think the bar is very important in helping us make that decision. And I believe the system we have now works pretty well. I mean, there's no perfect system. But I'm afraid with a lot of the rulings we've seen, a lot of people are unhappy with the rulings, with the constitutional rulings. I think that's what's brought this whole procedure on. I'm afraid it's going to be more political, and that's I believe that's going to hurt our democracy. Well, I know it will hurt our democracy. So we need the best people that understand the Constitution, able to enforce the Constitution. And I don't agree with what's going on here. I think it's going to be a huge problem. I mean, it's very confusing. I don't, everything that was been said, I don't know if you really understand what's going on. It's hard to understand why we're even doing this change. But I oppose it. I think we ought to keep the system the way it is. It's working quite well. And the governor kind of has the final, get applicants to choose from, and the governor makes the final choice on who's going to be appointed. They appoint who the judges are. So to me, it's comparing like the medical board to best practices. So you let lay people, you know, I could be wrong, but we need the professionals in there to decide who's the best, that they've worked with these people. And I don't think it's so much a favoritism, a buddy system. The lawyers I talked to are very concerned how this is gonna go. And I don't want to see it, our judges being a political process appointed by politicians. But that's how I feel about it.
Well, I've had a number of folks email me and say to me over these last weeks that we have one of the best systems in the nation as far as choosing our judges, and I agree. However, that doesn't mean that we can't always strive to make a good system better. And I was visiting the other day with Senator Grassley, who was reminding me that prior to 60 years ago, judges actually were selected at, judge nominees were selected at political conventions, separate conventions from what you think of political conventions now, but nonetheless still political conventions determined by the party. And then those individuals selected by that convention would go on the ballot, and you would choose them on election day. Then 60 years ago, Senator Grassley actually voted for the changes that turned us to a merit system, which is what we have now. However, I thought it was interesting that he said as they were debating that those changes, they actually put into the law provisions for the legislature to change the system because I think in their wisdom 60 years ago, they realized that there may be a time when tweaks needed to be made, changes needed to be made to the law. So having said that, we are looking at this. There is not a final provision. We certainly want the system to remain pristine. We want it to remain fair. We do not want politics in it. And that's why I think there have been multiple subcommittees, there have been multiple meetings about this. We're taking all kinds of input from attorneys, from lay people, from people who work within this system, because if we can change the system to make it better, we want to do that. We don't want to change the system to make it worse. But I think it's our prerogative and right as a legislative body to, after 60 years, look at this and say, is this still working the best for Iowans, to make sure that every Iowan's voice is heard and heard fairly when dealing with a court of law. So there's nothing final at this point. We're still looking at how best to move forward with this issue.
Thank you very much. We have just a couple of minutes remaining. So at the pace we were going, not really time to dig into another question. But there was some conversation brought up before this, so I'm just going to ask a question, if we could. To offer an update, if you could, if there is an update to be offered on rural broadband and access, to broadband in rural communities.
You know, I was asked that question literally on my way out the door Thursday night, and I haven't had a chance to follow up on that yet. I am going to, it's on my to-do list on Monday when I walk back in there, but I don't have an update on that yet, reference whether capital allocations through RIF or what the specific plan might be for that.
Rural broadband is such an important issue. About 10 years ago at Creighton University, then Congressman Tom Osborne came in, working with Bill McQuillan from Greeley Bank in Nebraska to get this bubbling up at the federal level. In speaking with Representative Hine and also Representative Postian and Gary Moore, there is an effort in the House to try to broaden the broadband, and obviously if you're like me and you just pop south of Trainer to Silver City, there are still places in Silver City where it's almost impossible to get a wireless signal. So it is a big issue yet for a lot of us, even in southwest Iowa, and working with my ag colleagues in the House. And hopefully we'll have an update for you as the session continues to progress.
I don't have an update.
I don't think, we'll make that, we'll put that on our list to update you the the next meeting. I don't think any of us have an update. I know that it is an issue that's very important to the governor. It was one of her priorities. It's also very important to a lot of rural economic development entities because I've heard from a lot of folks in rural Iowa that the lack of that broadband is hurting their ability to entice businesses, to just maintain their economic development. And so we're, have a lot of rural areas in our state. It's an important issue, but we'll make it our priority to have an update for you at the next legislative coffee.
Thank you guys for that. I know there were some people mentioning that before we started, so I want to make sure we got that, but there was no official question that came in. Thank you for that update. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items, and we'll let everybody get out of here. Hopefully beat the weather home. Hopefully nothing started in the last hour. Our next legislative coffee will be Saturday, March 23rd. Same time, same place. As always, and as today is a perfect illustration, regardless of weather, we do intend for these to go on. So appreciate very much everybody's attendance. It was awesome. Thank you for the head count that there was 80 here. That's incredible with the weather. Thank you to our representatives and state senator for being here today and taking questions. And I also would like to offer one final thank you to Representative Anusa for the nice segue that she offered me the opportunity to say in her opening remarks about making sure that you're prepared for the weather. If you're not, I know a place not too far from here that can help you out. So with that, everybody drive safe, enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you on March 23rd. Thank you.